All right. Good morning, everybody. How are y'all today? Good to see you on this Wednesday. Had a full week already.
Yes, it has been.
It's been a full one
Beautifully
already.
full.
Beautifully full first
Yes.
couple of days of the week. So awesome. Had great times last night at our different home groups. Great times at our different home groups last night. So It was very, very cool to
Absolutely.
see. Just God doing wonderful things in people. That's so very cool. So
Yes, so very cool.
So with this week, just again gonna kind of give it maybe another few seconds. But it's mailbag week. So yay, we actually have questions. Woohoo. So remember, we love to hear and receive your questions. So we will compile them and share them at the end of the week if that's okay. But if there's enough of them, we'll share them throughout the whole month.
Yeah, at the end of the month.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We'll share them at the end of the month for that week if there's not a lot of them, but if more and more come in, we'll be glad to share them throughout the month. So please don't hesitate. Send in your questions and just about any topic as you're about to see here.
Yes.
And so without further ado, again, as many of you know, we talk a lot about family and about God's design for family and God's design for what the family is, what it means, how to enjoy it, how to live in it to its fullness. And so these questions kind of came in somewhat around that. Is that right?
Yeah,
so since they contacted you, and again, they did it in a message, so we're going to keep that anonymous, as that is, if you put your question in the comments, we assume it's okay to announce your name, but if you send us a message, we'll keep it anonymous.
That's right.
So what did they ask? What was their question?
So, we'll start with the first
part
of the question. And that is, so in Genesis, when the Lord created Adam and Eve, he gave them a mandate to fill the earth. And now it looks like the earth is full. And so what do we do now? Like, how do we interpret that? And do we just keep having lots of kids and following that mandate, even though it just looks like, by all intents and purposes, so earth is full. Now what, right? So that was the question.
So that's it. So let's answer some of that, because again, there's always a question behind the question, or there's always something that's behind all the questions we have about anything. So many times, to help, you have to kind of look past the initial question to anything that's behind it. So somewhat in this question, behind it is an assumption that God's creation is limited.
Oh, that's a good point.
Does that make sense? So again, again, we come at everything from a biblical worldview. Right? We come at everything from a kingdom mindset, not from a, if you will, worldly. But what I mean by worldly is not necessarily sinful, but
just the way this age thinks.
Yeah, this way this age thinks, a non-God mindset.
Right.
So with a secular mindset, that's good. So in a secular mindset, we think and assume things are limited. Right, like again, and I mean, one of the hot button topics is, now is, especially here in the United States, is, put the push to go electric in our vehicles. Always the classic argument for the push of a different power source is that, well, fossil fuels are limited, until they're starting to discover that they're returning. Until they're starting to go back to some things that ran out, and given time, they're not run out anymore.
Are they renewable?
And then now everybody's going, well, we thought this was a limited resource, but it doesn't seem like it's a limited resource. So now our whole paradigm has to shift. Again, there's limited amount of food. I mean, that's another big one. We got to stop, populating the earth because there's a limited amount of food, until you look at the DeVry family in, I think it's Pasadena, California. Now, this is as far as I can tell from their videos, this is a non-Christian family. They don't necessarily espouse any belief in God. So they're just folk, right? And they took their 1/8 of an acre, which is a standard U.S. subdivision lot, and they produce almost 10,000 pounds of produce a year off of 1/8 of an acre. And so there's many people going, well, if we all did that,
We'd
then
have so
we'd
much
have
food.
so much
We have to
food.
give it away.
Well, and then if you look at the Amish family we just met recently that run a kind of a NGO type government agency that, and their stats are this: in the United States alone, we have anywhere from the conservative kind of non-scary thought is 40% food waste at the grocery store. We're talking about food that is made, packaged, put up. We waste 40% of it, and they recapture it. It's so funny. I actually met another lady just this last week in my restaurant, and she actually runs a ministry here she doesn't run it. She's a part of the staff that I'm gonna make sure I'm as accurate as I know how.
Yeah.
That they do what's called food rescue.
Yeah.
So they rescue food that would just make it to the dumpster that's still totally usable, but just because of parameters for safety has to be thrown out. And that number on a conservative end is 40%. Many suppose it's 60.
Wow, you guys.
So they say with just the food we waste in the United States, we would end hunger here in our country. So there's a lot.
It's a mismanagement rather than there's not enough.
Well, and again, I think, so sometimes that kind of stuff is we have to be careful with the narratives that are espoused, that are presented, because if they come without God, then they're limited to man. And that's the problem. They're either limited to man's knowledge, because at one time that's what we thought.
Yeah.
Fossil fuels were going to go away until we discover that somehow they reappear. And they still don't know how that does that.
Yeah.
But they're beginning to think, well,
Yeah.
right? Again, there's a food shortage. I mean, again, even when you look at like this in Jefferson County, Alabama, right here where we live, the stat is, and I track the stat fairly regularly, almost annually. I'll check it to see what it is. But we're sitting at about a 24% what's called food challenged rate, which means 1 out of every 4 people in our county, and it's right now it's the most populous county in the state. 1 out of 4 people are food challenged, which means they have a meal a day. They just don't know which one it is. Right? So if you look at that, you go, well, there's hunger out there, and that's because we got too many people to feed. And no, we're just not managing our food system well.
Right.
Again, without God, we're limited to what man can do.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So I say that as we talk about this, you have to realize that we're going to answer this question with God fully involved.
Right. Yeah.
So with God fully involved with your family, with God fully involved with people, right? Truly things are limitless.
They are.
Because he is a limitless. And even apparently when we look at creation, again, I'm just kind of making up stuff that I've studied as people have asked me this question. They talk about, well, what about pollution?
Right.
And problems on the planet. And this is the one I would say, hey, I agree with you. We are some nasty, dirty folk without God.
Yes.
Right? Without God, we create a whole bunch of waste. And we don't want to deal with our waste, so we send it away and make it somebody else's problem. So I hear you. There's some massive cleanup that could stand to be done. There's some new practices we could put in place for packaging that I think we're starting to do. But at the end of the day, they know that, again, if you will quit dumping stuff into a stream, give it a year or so, and it's clean again.
Just the way God designed.
Just the way God.
Everything to filter out and clean itself and sustain. Yes.
It will clean. Again, Mount St. Helens erupted back in the 80s, and the scientists were like, oh my goodness, this is such a huge natural disaster. This is a travesty in the ecosystem. It's going to take generations for this to restore.
Such a wasteland.
All this kind of stuff. It's just going to be a wasteland. And then they were stunned, as an example, because I'm a hunter, right, that the elk herds that were there began to have twins and triplets for like 3 or 4 consecutive years after Mount St. Helens. Now, normally a cow elk, she'll have one. She'll have one calf. But for 3 or 4 years, the elk around that area went into hyper production mode and were dropping twins and triplets until it returned back to balance, and then they went right back down to having one calf
God
a year.
Just amazing how he set things into motion in just the way he created our planet to be self-healing, if you will. Just like he created our bodies to be self-healing.
Absolutely.
Right? If you just give it the right stuff, if you give it time, if you nourish it properly, it will come back to how God designed it to work. That's amazing.
So I say all that to say, as we start talking about this, because that's some of the stuff where, there's an internet. Now, this is a non-Christian little video, and maybe Selena, if you can find the link and put it in the comments, if it's still on YouTube. Now, again, that's always if it's there. But I watched it about 10 years ago. So again, I'm just saying all the stuff, but it's called Demographic Winter. And this is, again, a group of demographers. Secular. All evolutionary by their own confession in the video. And they're absolutely stunned in this video with the subject of population. I like one of them that I remember quotes from the video. One of them says this. He says, there's 7 billion people on the planet, not because we're breeding like rabbits, but because we finally learned how to stop dying like flies. He says we're actually, and that's why they call it a demographic winter, our population rates are so low that we're creating social and economic problems at a global level. And just watch the video and they'll walk you through economies that could collapse. They now know the whole of Europe is unrecoverable as far as culture goes. Because the kind of in the video they talk about this, that if a culture, a nation, has a birth rate lower than 2.2 people per couple for over, and I can't remember, it's either 10 or 15 years, so let's go big, let's say it's 15. If they have a birth rate lower than 2.2 for 15 years or more, you can't save that culture mathematically. There's just not enough time to, and so that's why you look at Europe. Europe is depending for its economies upon the immigration of the Middle Eastern nations, the African nations, some of the other ones that they're allowing to come in because they just don't have enough people. And in that video, you'll see them talk about in Germany, them literally dismantling cities. Whole cities.
Because there's nobody to populate them anymore, right?
Right. They're just, again, China just went through this a little while ago. We all know China under the influence of the first President Bush, before he was president. I think he was like secretary or something. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Sorry about that. But he encouraged them to have a one-child mandate that was in place because of population. And so they went into the one-child mandate until China realized they could no longer be a financial superpower because they wouldn't have the workforce to sustain what they're trying to create. So they lifted that, and now it's a 2-child mandate. They're trying to get back to 2.2. Because the way China worked under the one-child mandate is you could have one child for free, so to speak. The next child lifted your tax burden, caused more tax burden on you, or added to your tax burden. And then if you were going to get pregnant again, they normally aborted and sterilized at that point. But now, under their new stuff, you can have 2 children for free. A 3rd child would just increase your tax burden because they're trying to get back to 2.2. They're trying to increase, to maintain their culture. So again, don't always just believe all the hype that's out there about the planet's dying, we're killing the place, we're overpopulating the earth, it can't take it anymore, it can't sustain it. I say it like this, we just haven't gone to God to learn how to
be good stewards.
To be good stewards
of the planet.
And how how to work it. Again, last story, and it comes right out of Alabama, one of my favorites. And if you haven't, if you're listening, you need to read the biography of George Washington Carver.
Oh,
So real
absolutely.
brief story. So
Yes.
George Washington Carver was born as a slave to a slave mother, kind of in the ends of the Civil War. Again, long story that you need to just read. He ends up, his
Amazing.
mother is murdered. He's adopted by his white owners. The Civil War ends. He becomes a true son of the family, right, of the Carver family. They raise him up. He begins a journey. He goes and becomes one of the first highly educated African Americans that are there.
Just amazing.
So many God stuff in there
Yes.
you
Yeah.
can't even fathom it, right? That God would do something with one man that much, But ends up in Tuskegee, Alabama,
Yeah.
at the Tuskegee Institute,
Yeah.
right? And then this was his story in the book. He talks about how that every day he would rise early and walk in the woods and talk with God. And he says this of himself. He says, Lord, show me, and I think show me about the earth, or he threw out some big thing. And God says, George, your little brain is just not big enough to handle the whole earth. He goes, okay, then, because he was a botanist. He goes, okay, well, then just show me about all the plants. He goes, again, son, that's a little too big for your brain. And then he goes, well, can you tell me about the peanut?
Oh my goodness, yes.
And then he goes, God says, okay, I think you can handle the peanut. And then he says that every day he would walk, he would talk with God, and God would show him how to unlock the peanut.
Yes.
And from the peanut alone, he produced over 800 products.
Yes.
From the sweet potato, because then he did the same exercise with the sweet potato, he produced over like 200 or 300 products. Now again, this is just one man
Asking God how to
asking
engage with
God
his creation.
how to engage with his creation, and there's so much abundance locked in the creation of God that we have not even
Tapped into. That's right. We
So
need
it-
more scientists.
We need more God-centered,
God-centered scientists.
But we just, for all of us that are watching or listening wherever you are, I just want to encourage you, God is limitless.
Yep.
So sure, if I'm depending on me alone, or I'm depending on mankind
Yes.
alone to find the problems that are, again, I'm not saying there's not, they are problems.
Yeah,
I'm not saying
absolutely.
but if I'm dependent on me, I am limited.
Very much so.
I am very much limited. We as a species are limited. We are finite. We are locked in. But we have a Father
Yes.
who created it all,
Limitless.
and he is limitless.
Absolutely.
So when he says, go, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. When that subdue part is what George Washington Carver did.
That's right.
Subdue it. Have dominion over it.
Yes.
It's not just be fruit. I think many times ministers stop at be fruitful and multiply. But there was 5 things God, the 5 original commands, and this is,
Right.
we'll talk about maybe more of this in the week. The 5 original commands were fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion.
Right.
And when we do those things in our world,
Yes.
right, then we see the unlimited abundance of God
Absolutely.
flow out
Oh,
of
absolutely.
his creation, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so there we go. Again, maybe I opened up a whole bunch of worms. I don't know. Throw in some questions. Throw in some comments. Selena's going to throw in the demographic winter video.
Yes,
and
if I
we'll
can
see you
find
guys
it.
back here tomorrow.
That's right.
Love
Thank you for
guys.
watching.
Uh-huh.